The dust kicked up around Jack Morrison's worn boots as he stepped into the Silver Spur Saloon in Prescott, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1882. And every head turned to watch the man they considered nothing more than a drifter with empty pockets and emptier prospects. Jack had arrived in Prescott 3 months earlier with a bedroll, a horse that had seen better days, and a leather satchel he kept close to his chest. He worked odd jobs around town, mucking out stables, repairing fences, and doing whatever honest work came his way. The townspeople saw a man in patched trousers and a hat with a hole in the brim, and they made their assumptions accordingly. "Look who decided to grace us with his presence," Theodore Blackwell announced from his usual table near the bar. Theodore was the richest man in Prescott, owner of the largest cattle operation in the territory, and he never let anyone forget it. His daughter, Catherine, sat beside him, her green eyes fixed on the ledger book spread before her. She handled all her father's accounts, a sharp mind trapped in a world that rarely valued such intelligence in women. "Does he even have 2 coins to rub together?" Marcus Webb laughed, his voice carrying across the room. Marcus owned the general store and half the buildings on Whiskey Row. "I heard he is sleeping in the livery stable." Jack ignored them as he always did, walking to the bar and ordering a whiskey with the few coins he had earned that day. The bartender, Samuel, was one of the few people who treated him with basic human decency. "Do not let them get to you," Samuel said quietly, pouring the drink. "Never do," Jack replied, though the words stung more than he cared to admit. Catherine Blackwell glanced up from her ledger, her eyes meeting Jack's for just a moment. Something flickered in her gaze, curiosity perhaps, or maybe recognition that he carried himself with more dignity than his appearance suggested. She was 22 years old, educated back east at her mother's insistence before her mother had passed away 5 years ago. Since then, she had been her father's right hand in business, though he rarely acknowledged her contributions in public. "Catherine, stop staring at the help," Theodore said loudly enough for half the saloon to hear. "A woman of your station should not even acknowledge such people." Her cheeks flushed, but not from embarrassment. Catherine had grown tired of her father's cruelty, his constant need to belittle others to feel superior. She closed the ledger with more force than necessary. "I was not staring, I was thinking." "Well, think about something worthwhile. Harrison Crane is coming by the ranch tomorrow, fine young man from a good family. You could do worse." Catherine's jaw tightened. Harrison Crane was her father's business partner's son, a man who had made his intentions clear despite her complete lack of interest. He was handsome enough, she supposed, but there was a coldness behind his eyes that made her uncomfortable. Jack finished his whiskey and left the saloon, stepping into the warm evening air. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He walked toward the small room he rented above the saddle shop, not the livery as the gossips claimed. It was not much, but it was his, and it was honest. The next morning, Jack was hired to help repair fencing on the Blackwell ranch. He arrived early, ready to work, and found himself under the supervision of the ranch foreman, a gruff but fair man named Tom Haywood. "You know your way around a fence line?" Tom asked. "Yes, sir. Grew up working ranches in Texas before I came out here." "Texas, huh? What brought you to Arizona?" Jack paused, his hands stilling on the wire he was unrolling. "Looking for something that belongs to me." Tom did not press further, respecting a man's right to his own story. They worked in companionable silence for most of the morning, the sun climbing higher and the temperature rising. Around midday, a figure on horseback appeared on the horizon, riding toward them with confident grace. Catherine Blackwell sat astride a beautiful chestnut mare, wearing a practical riding outfit that her father would have deemed unladylike. She carried a canteen and a basket, which she had brought for the workers as she often did, though her father thought such gestures beneath her station. "Mr. Haywood, I brought water and food," she called out as she approached. "Much appreciated, Miss Catherine," Tom replied, wiping the sweat from his brow. Jack straightened from his work, and for the first time he and Catherine were close enough for a proper look at each other. She saw a man in his mid-20s with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were a striking blue, clear and honest, with an intelligence that contradicted his humble circumstances. He saw a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid, green eyes that sparkled with quick wit, and hands that showed she was not afraid of work despite her privileged upbringing. There was something genuine about her, something that cut through the pretense he had seen in so many others. "Thank you, ma'am," Jack said, accepting a cup of water from her. "You are the man from the saloon last night," Catherine said, and it was not a question. "Yes, ma'am, Jack Morrison, Catherine Blackwell, though I suppose you knew that already. Hard not to in a town this size." She smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "I apologize for my father's behavior. He can be rather harsh." "No need to apologize for someone else's choices, Miss Blackwell." The simple wisdom in his words struck her. Most people either cowered before her father or emulated his behavior hoping to gain favor. This man did neither. He simply existed with a quiet confidence that she found refreshing. "Have you been working ranches long?" she asked, genuinely curious, "since I was old enough to sit a horse." "My father had a spread in Texas, small but productive. He taught me everything about working the land, respecting it, understanding that you are a steward, not just an owner." That is a beautiful way to think about it. "My father sees land as a commodity, something to be exploited for maximum profit." "And what do you see it as?" The question surprised her. No one asked Catherine what she thought about anything important. "I see it as you do, I think, as something to be cared for, protected. Land that is treated well will provide for generations." Their conversation was interrupted by Tom clearing his throat. "Miss Catherine, your father is going to wonder where you got off to." She nodded reluctantly. "Of course. Good day, Mr. Morrison. Good day, Miss Blackwell." As she rode away, Jack found his eyes following her until she disappeared over the ridge. Tom chuckled beside him. "You are playing with fire there, son. Theodore Blackwell would sooner shoot a man than let him court his daughter, especially a man he considers beneath her." "I was just being polite." "Sure you were." But Jack could not stop thinking about her as he worked through the afternoon. There was something about Catherine Blackwell that called to him, a kindred spirit trapped in circumstances not of her choosing, much like himself. That evening, Jack returned to his room and carefully removed a tin box from beneath the loose floorboard where he kept it hidden. Inside was a single document, yellowed with age and carefully folded. He opened it gently, reading the words he had memorized long ago. It was a deed, dated 1865, signed by the territorial governor and witnessed by 3 officials. The deed granted his father, James Morrison, ownership of significant parcels of land throughout the Prescott area as payment for services rendered during the Civil War. His father had been a scout and guide for the Union Army in the Western Territories, and his knowledge had helped secure several strategic victories. In gratitude, he had been given land, lots of land. But his father had been a humble man, more interested in working a small ranch than laying claim to property scattered across the territory. He had kept the deed, intending to pass it to Jack when the time was right, but he had died suddenly when Jack was 20, killed by a fall from a spooked horse. Jack's mother had passed when he was just a boy, and he found himself alone with nothing but the clothes on his back and that precious deed. For 3 years, Jack had worked and saved, trying to earn enough money to travel to Prescott and claim what was rightfully his. He needed funds for a lawyer, for surveying, for all the legal necessities that came with asserting property rights. He also needed to understand exactly what he was claiming and who might have built on or claimed his land in the years since the deed was issued. What Jack had discovered upon arriving in Prescott had been shocking. The land his father had been deeded included half the current town of Prescott itself, significant portions of the surrounding ranches including most of Theodore Blackwell's spread. parts of the copper mines to the north, and grazing lands that several other prominent citizens considered their own. He had been gathering information quietly, understanding the situation before he made his move. He needed a good lawyer, and he needed to be absolutely certain of his claim before he upended the lives of half the territory's wealthy elite. These were powerful people who would not give up their holdings without a fight. Jack had been communicating with a lawyer in Phoenix, a man named Edmund Hartwell who specialized in land grants and property law. Hartwell had reviewed copies of the deed and confirmed that it appeared legitimate and binding. He was currently researching the territorial records to ensure there were no conflicting claims or legal complications. Once Hartwell gave the word, Jack would file his claim officially. The following Sunday, Jack attended services at the small church on the edge of town. He was not particularly religious, but he appreciated the sense of community and the reminder to live with integrity. He sat in the back pew as he always did, surprised when Catherine Blackwell entered alone and after a moment's hesitation sat beside him. "Miss Blackwell," he acknowledged quietly, "Mr. Morrison, I hope you do not mind the company." "Not at all, though I imagine your father would." "My father is sleeping off his excesses from last night and will not attend today. I find I prefer it this way." During the service, Jack was acutely aware of her presence beside him. She had a beautiful singing voice, clear and pure, and when they stood to sing hymns, he found himself listening more to her than joining in himself. After the service ended, they walked out together into the bright sunshine. "Would you care to take a walk, Mr. Morrison?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it is forward of me, but I find I would enjoy the conversation." "I would like that very much, Miss Blackwell, but I do not want to cause you trouble. I am a grown woman, perfectly capable of choosing my own company for a Sunday walk." They strolled along the quieter streets of Prescott, talking about everything and nothing. Catherine spoke of her education back east, her love of literature and mathematics, her frustration at being seen as merely decorative in a world run by men. Jack told her about growing up in Texas, about his father's wisdom and kindness, about his dreams of building something lasting and meaningful. "Why did you really come to Prescott?" Catherine asked as they paused beneath the shade of a large cottonwood tree. Jack considered lying, offering the vague explanation he had given others, but something about Catherine made him want to be honest. "I came to claim what is mine. My father was granted land here years ago, and I have the deed to prove it. I have been working with a lawyer to ensure everything is legitimate before I file the claim. Land here, how much land? A considerable amount, including, I believe, most of your father's ranch." Catherine stopped walking, her eyes wide. "You are serious, completely." "I am not here to cause trouble, Miss Blackwell. I am just trying to claim my birthright. My father earned that land through service to this country, and I intend to honor his legacy." "Does anyone else know?" "Only my lawyer in Phoenix." "I wanted to be certain of my legal standing before I made waves." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face. "This will destroy my father. That ranch is everything to him. I know, and I am sorry for that. But the land was never legally his. I have examined the records. He claimed it, built on it, but he never had clear title. No one did. What will you do when you file your claim? That depends on many things. I am not a cruel man, Miss Blackwell. I do not wish to throw people out of their homes. But I also cannot let my father's sacrifice be for nothing." They resumed walking, the easy comfort of earlier replaced by the weight of this revelation. When they reached the point where they needed to part ways, Catherine turned to him. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Morrison. I appreciate that you told me the truth. Jack, please call me Jack. Then you must call me Catherine." "Catherine," he said, enjoying the way her name felt in his mouth. "I hope this does not mean we cannot continue our acquaintance." She smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I would like to continue our acquaintance very much, but I fear things are about to become very complicated." She was right, of course. Over the following weeks, Jack and Catherine continued to meet, always carefully, always away from prying eyes. They would encounter each other on trails outside of town, at the small library Catherine frequented, in the quiet corners of the general store. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond pleasant small talk to genuine connection. Jack found himself falling for her quick mind and kind heart, for the way she saw the world with clarity and compassion. She challenged him, made him think differently, made him want to be better. And Catherine, despite knowing the storm that was coming, found herself drawn to Jack in ways she had never experienced before. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, and looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "My father is pushing harder for me to accept Harrison Crane's courtship," Catherine confided one afternoon as they sat by a creek outside of town. "He wants to merge the ranches, create an empire. And what do you want?" Jack asked, though his heart hammered in his chest as he waited for her answer. "I want to choose my own path. I want to be with someone who sees me as a partner, not a possession. I want to wake up every morning excited about the life I am building, not dreading another day of pretense and emptiness." Jack reached out and took her hand, the first time they had touched beyond a polite handshake. "Catherine, I know my timing is terrible, and I know I have no right to ask anything of you, especially with what is about to happen. But I need you to know that I have fallen in love with you, completely and irrevocably in love with you." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes, happy tears for once. "Jack Morrison, I have been waiting for you to say that. I love you too. I think I have since that first day at the fence line when you spoke about being a steward of the land." He leaned forward and kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a kiss full of promise and hope despite the uncertainty of their future. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "We will face whatever comes together," Catherine said firmly. "I do not care about my father's money or his approval. I care about you. It will not be easy. When I file that claim, your father and half the town will want my head. Then we had better make sure your legal standing is absolutely unassailable." Catherine proved to be an invaluable ally in the weeks that followed. Her knowledge of her father's business dealings, combined with her sharp mind for legal matters, helped Jack and Edmund Hartwell strengthen the case. She discovered that her father had never properly filed claims on much of the land he considered his, instead relying on the fact that he had simply taken it, and no one had challenged him. In late September, Edmund Hartwell arrived in Prescott with news. "The territorial records confirm everything," he told Jack and Catherine in a private meeting at the lawyer's hotel room. "Your father's deed is legitimate, properly executed, and takes precedence over any subsequent claims. You own approximately 12,000 acres in and around Prescott, including substantial portions of what is currently claimed by Theodore Blackwell, Marcus Webb, and several others." "What is our next step?" Jack asked. "We file the claim officially with the territorial court and serve notice to all parties currently occupying your land. Then we negotiate. Most of these people have built homes, businesses, lives on this land. You could legally evict them all, but that would be neither practical nor profitable." "I have no intention of throwing people into the street," Jack said firmly. "I want to work out fair arrangements. They can purchase the land at reasonable rates, or we can work out lease agreements. I just want what is rightfully mine and to be treated with the respect my father earned." "That is admirably compassionate, but be prepared for resistance. Men like Theodore Blackwell do not like being told they have been wrong, especially by someone they consider inferior." The claim was filed on October 1st. By October 2nd, all of Prescott was in an uproar. Theodore Blackwell stormed into the territorial courthouse, demanding to see Jack and threatening violence. The sheriff had to physically restrain him. "You are nothing," Theodore screamed as Jack stood calmly before him, flanked by Edmund Hartwell. "A nobody trying to steal what honest men have built." "I am not stealing anything, Mr. Blackwell. I am claiming what my father was legally granted 18 years ago." You have been squatting on my land, and while I am willing to work out a fair arrangement, you will not bully or intimidate me into walking away from my rights. Your rights? You have no rights. I will fight this in every court in the territory. That is your prerogative. But I assure you my claim will stand. Perhaps instead of fighting, we should discuss terms. Theodore lunged at Jack, but the sheriff and his deputies intercepted him. Get out of my sight before I kill you. As Theodore was escorted from the courthouse, still shouting threats, Edmund turned to Jack. That went about as well as expected. He will come around. Once he realizes he has no legal ground to stand on, his business sense will override his pride. And what about his daughter? Jack's expression softened. Catherine is making her own choices. She is stronger than her father gives her credit for. That evening, Catherine appeared at Jack's room above the saddle shop, her face flushed from riding hard. My father knows about us. Someone saw us by the creek and told him. He is absolutely furious. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? No, but he said terrible things. He has forbidden me from seeing you, threatened to disown me, called me a traitor. Harrison Crane was there, and the way he looked at me, Jack, it frightened me. Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Stay here tonight. You can have the bed. I will sleep on the floor. We will figure this out tomorrow. I cannot stay here. It would ruin my reputation completely. Then we will go to the boarding house and get you a room. But I am not letting you go back there tonight, not while your father is in such a rage. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, was a kind woman who had always treated Jack decently. She gave Catherine a room without asking too many questions, though her knowing look suggested she understood more than she let on. Over the next few days, the situation in Prescott reached a boiling point. Marcus Webb and several other landowners joined Theodore in fighting Jack's claim, hiring their own lawyers and filing countersuits. But Edmund Hartwell was better, and the law was clearly on Jack's side. One by one, the countersuits were dismissed. Theodore tried a different approach, spreading vicious rumors about Jack. He claimed Jack was a con man, a fraud, that the deed was forged. But when the territorial governor's office confirmed the deed's authenticity and pointed out that it bore the seal and signature of the governor himself, those rumors died quickly. Harrison Crane proved to be a more serious problem. He had become obsessed with Catherine, seeing her as rightfully his, and he blamed Jack for turning her against him. One night in late October, he confronted Jack outside the Silver Spur saloon. "You have taken everything from me," Harrison snarled, his breath reeking of whiskey. "My future, my land, my woman. Catherine was never your woman, Crane. She is her own person and she makes her own choices. She made the wrong choice." Harrison threw a punch, which Jack dodged easily. He had been in enough fights growing up to know how to handle himself. But Harrison kept coming, and soon they were grappling in the street, a crowd gathering to watch. The sheriff broke it up before anyone was seriously hurt, but the message was clear. Harrison Crane was not going to let this go peacefully. "You need to be careful," the sheriff warned Jack later. "Crane is dangerous when he drinks, and he has been drinking a lot lately. And Theodore Blackwell is not the type to forgive and forget. Watch your back." Jack took the warning seriously, but he refused to be intimidated. He had right on his side, and he had Catherine's love. That was enough. In mid-November, the territorial court issued its final ruling. Jack Morrison's claim was legitimate and legally binding. All parties currently occupying his land had 60 days to either negotiate purchase or lease agreements or vacate the property. The ruling sent shockwaves through Prescott's elite, but it also established clear terms for moving forward. Jack immediately began reaching out to the affected parties, offering generous terms. For people who had built homes on his land, he offered to sell them reasonable parcels at fair prices. For the larger landowners like Theodore Blackwell, he proposed long-term lease agreements that would allow them to continue their operations while acknowledging his ownership. Most people accepted, grateful that Jack was being reasonable. Marcus Webb grumbled, but signed a lease agreement for the land under his store and warehouse. The copper mine owners negotiated a profit-sharing arrangement that actually benefited everyone involved. Theodore Blackwell was the last holdout. His pride would not let him accept that he had been wrong, that everything he thought he owned actually belonged to the son of a man he had never known. He refused every offer Jack made, instead holing up at the ranch and vowing to defend it by force if necessary. Catherine had not spoken to her father since the night she left. She had taken a job at the library, supporting herself with dignity despite the whispers and stares. Jack had proposed to her in early November, presenting her with a simple gold band he had saved for months to purchase. "It is not much," he said as he knelt before her in the boarding house parlor, "but it comes with all my love and a promise that I will spend every day of my life making you happy. Catherine Blackwell, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said through happy tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They planned a simple wedding for early December, to be held at the small church where they had first sat together. Catherine wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Henderson, and Jack wore his one good suit. Most of the town attended, curious to see the union of the man who owned half of Prescott and the woman who had defied her powerful father for love. Theodore did not attend, but Catherine had not expected him to. It hurt, knowing her father would rather cling to his pride than share her joy, but Jack's love gave her strength. After the wedding, they took residence in a small but comfortable house on the edge of town, while Jack oversaw the construction of a proper home on a beautiful piece of land with views of the mountains. He hired workers at fair wages and treated them with respect, earning loyalty and quality work in return. Theodore's situation grew increasingly desperate. Without a legal claim to the land, he could not use it as collateral for loans. His debts mounted and creditors began circling. In late December, Harrison Crane made his move, buying up Theodore's debts and demanding immediate payment. "You have nothing, Blackwell," Harrison told him coldly. "Your daughter is gone, your land is not yours, and now I own your debts. You are ruined." Theodore had never felt so low. He had been a king in Prescott, feared and respected, and now he was nothing. He drank heavily, raging at the injustice of it all, but deep down he knew the truth. He had been living on borrowed land and borrowed time, and the bill had come due. Catherine heard about her father's plight and felt her heart ache despite everything. "He is still my father," she told Jack. "I cannot just let him lose everything." "What do you want me to do?" "Offer him one more chance. A reasonable lease, terms he can actually meet. And maybe we can help him pay off what he owes to Harrison." Jack looked at his wife, this incredible woman with a heart big enough to forgive the man who had tried to destroy their happiness. "You are remarkable, you know that. I just do not want to build our happiness on my father's complete ruin. Can we afford to be generous? We can. The mine profit-sharing alone is bringing in more than enough income, and we have lease payments from everyone else. We can afford to help him." Jack rode out to the Blackwell Ranch on a cold January morning in 1883. Theodore answered the door looking like a shadow of his former self, unshaven and hollow-eyed. "What do you want?" Theodore asked, his voice lacking its usual venom. "To make you an offer. A 20-year lease on 2,000 acres at rates you can afford, with an option to purchase at the end if you want. And I will pay off your debts to Harrison Crane in exchange for a lien on your cattle operation." Theodore stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that?" "After everything I have done." "Because Catherine asked me to. Because she loves you despite everything, and I love her enough to give her this peace. And because my father taught me that a man is measured not by how he treats those who can help him, but by how he treats those who cannot." Theodore felt something break inside him, the hard shell of pride and anger that had been suffocating him. He broke down, sobbing like a child, years of pain and loss pouring out. "I have been a fool. A proud, stubborn fool. I drove away the only person who truly loved me, and for what? For land that was never even mine." Jack let him cry, understanding that some lessons could only be learned through loss. When Theodore finally composed himself, Jack handed him the papers. Read it over, take your time. The offer stands for 30 days. I do not need 30 days. I will sign it now. And Morrison, tell my daughter I am sorry. Tell her I know I do not deserve her forgiveness, but I am sorry. You should tell her yourself. It took Theodore another week to work up the courage to visit Catherine and Jack at their new home. Catherine answered the door, her face carefully neutral when she saw her father standing there with his hat in his hands. "Papa," she said softly, "Catherine, you look well, happy. I am happy. I am glad. I came to apologize for everything. For how I treated you, for how I treated your husband, for being too blind and stupid to see that you had found something real and precious. I do not expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I am sorry." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. She stepped forward and hugged her father, feeling him shake with emotion. "I forgive you, Papa, I always forgave you." Theodore stayed for dinner that night, and for the first time in years he truly saw his daughter. He saw her intelligence, her strength, her capacity for love and forgiveness. He saw the way Jack looked at her, with respect and adoration, and he realized his daughter had found something he had never given her: a true partnership. Over the following months, Theodore worked to rebuild his operation on the land Jack leased him. He was humbled but determined, and slowly he regained some of his former success. But he was a changed man, kinder and more considerate, more willing to help others and less concerned with status and pride. Harrison Crane left Prescott in disgrace after it came out that he had been involved in several illegal schemes to try to discredit Jack's claim. The territorial marshal arrested him for fraud and attempted bribery, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Jack and Catherine's home was completed in the spring of 1883, a beautiful ranch house with wide porches and views of the mountains. They filled it with laughter and love, hosting dinners for friends and neighbors, creating a warm and welcoming space. In the summer of 1884, Catherine gave birth to their first child, a healthy boy they named James after Jack's father. Theodore was there the day they brought the baby home, tears in his eyes as he held his grandson for the first time. "He is perfect," Theodore whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "Would you like to be involved in his life, Papa?" Catherine asked. "I want him to know his grandfather." "I would be honored." Theodore became a devoted grandfather, spending hours with little James, teaching him about horses and cattle, telling him stories. He and Jack developed a genuine friendship, bonding over their shared love of the land and their devotion to Catherine. Jack proved to be a fair and thoughtful landowner. He reinvested in the community, funding a new school and library, supporting local businesses, and creating opportunities for people who had none. The people of Prescott who had once mocked him now respected him, not just for his wealth but for his character. In 1886, Catherine gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Sarah. The house was full of noise and joy, children laughing and playing, Catherine singing as she worked, Jack coming in from the fields to sweep his wife into his arms and dance her around the kitchen. "Are you happy?" Jack asked her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the children finally asleep. "Deliriously happy," Catherine replied, leaning into his embrace. "Sometimes I think about that day in the saloon when you walked in and everyone mocked you. They thought you were nothing and you owned half the land beneath their feet. I never wanted the land for power or revenge. I wanted it because it was my father's legacy and because claiming it meant I could build the life I wanted. A life with you. We have built something beautiful, have we not? We have built everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The land around them was peaceful, well-tended, thriving under Jack's stewardship. In the distance, they could see the lights of Prescott, a town that had become their home. Over the years that followed, Jack and Catherine's family continued to grow. In 1888, they welcomed another son, whom they named Theodore after Catherine's father, a gesture that moved the older man to tears. And in 1890, their final child was born, a spirited little girl they named Rose. The children grew up surrounded by love and opportunity. James inherited his father's quiet strength and his mother's sharp mind. The twins were inseparable, adventurous and bold, keeping their parents on their toes. Young Theodore was gentle and thoughtful with a gift for understanding animals. And Rose was pure sunshine, bringing laughter wherever she went. Jack expanded his operations over the years, but always responsibly and sustainably. He developed innovative ranching techniques that other landowners copied, focused on conservation and long-term planning rather than short-term profits. His success inspired others to treat the land with more respect, and the entire region benefited. Catherine opened a school for girls in 1889, determined that young women in the Arizona Territory would have the same educational opportunities she had enjoyed. She taught mathematics and literature herself, inspiring a generation of girls to pursue their dreams regardless of what society said was proper. Theodore remained an active part of their lives until he passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1895 at the age of 68. He died knowing that his daughter was happy, that his grandchildren were thriving, and that he had found redemption through humility and love. At his funeral, Jack gave a eulogy that had everyone in tears, speaking of Theodore's transformation and the courage it took to admit fault and change. As Jack and Catherine grew older, they never lost the spark that had drawn them together. They still took walks by the creek where Jack had first told her he loved her. They still danced in the kitchen when they thought no one was watching. They still looked at each other with the same wonder and affection that had characterized their early days together. In 1902, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Jack and Catherine sat on the porch of their home surrounded by their children and a growing brood of grandchildren. James had married a lovely young woman named Helen and had given them 2 grandsons. The twins were both married as well, Emma to a teacher and Sarah to a rancher from a neighboring territory. Young Theodore was courting a girl from town, and even 14-year-old Rose had boys starting to pay attention, much to Jack's dismay. 20 years, Catherine said, taking Jack's hand. It feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. Best 20 years of my life, Jack replied, kissing her knuckles. Though I am looking forward to the next 20 and the 20 after that. We have been blessed, have we not, beyond measure. As the sun set on that anniversary evening, painting the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Jack Morrison reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had arrived in Prescott with nothing but a deed and a dream, mocked and dismissed by people who could not see past his worn clothes and empty pockets. But beneath his feet had been the foundation of an empire, the legacy his father had earned through service and sacrifice. He had claimed that legacy not with cruelty or vengeance but with fairness and integrity. He had won the love of an extraordinary woman who had seen him for who he truly was. He had built a family, a community, a life of meaning and purpose. The land his father had been granted had become more than just property. It had become home, a place where love flourished and dreams took root. In the gathering darkness, surrounded by the people he loved most in the world, Jack Morrison knew that he was the richest man in the territory, not because of the land he owned, but because of the life he had built upon it. The cowboy they had mocked had proven them all wrong, not by asserting his power, but by living with honor and grace. And as Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder and their grandchildren played in the yard before them, Jack smiled, knowing that his father's legacy had been fulfilled in ways neither of them could have imagined. The deed had given him land, but love had given him everything else that mattered. He held Catherine closer as the first stars appeared overhead, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every blessing that had led him to this perfect evening. Their children and grandchildren eventually headed home, leaving Jack and Catherine alone under the vast Arizona sky. They sat in their rocking chairs, hand in hand, listening to the sounds of the night, the distant cattle lowing, the soft rustle of wind through the grass, the peaceful silence of a life well lived. "I love you, Catherine Morrison," Jack said softly. Today, tomorrow, and forever. And I love you, Jack Morrison, my cowboy who had everything when the world thought he had nothing. They rocked gently, two souls perfectly content, as the land they loved stretched out around them in the darkness, and above them the stars shone bright and eternal, witnesses to a love story that had transformed not just two lives but an entire community, proving that true wealth is measured not in acres owned but in lives touched, in love shared, in legacies built on integrity and grace.